What's going on, everyone? My name is Nicholas Merton here at DataDash, and today is January 18th of 2019. Well, folks, I hope you all are having a great day wherever you are, and today I want to spend a decent amount of time not only talking about a topic that many of you have requested I cover here on the DataDash channel, but along with that as well, talk about a topic that has fascinated me for almost a decade now, and that is the discussion of legalizing medicinal and recreational use of cannabis, both in the United States or abroad. Now, before we dive into talking about cannabis and marijuana and the market around it, I want to make one thing very clear. I understand this is a political topic, and because of that, there can be some controversy. I've met people from across the political spectrum, many of which I would assume you guys would fall into because many of you are libertarians and people in the cryptocurrency space who believe that legalization should be the standard, that it's just as safe, if not safer, than alcohol, and that no matter what, we should keep it in a legal market. We should possibly regulate and tax it to a slight degree. And then also, it could just be that you hold the view in the civil liberty position of, hey, it's my body and my choice. But a lot of people as well also hold another different viewpoint where they might believe that it should be a criminal activity to engage using marijuana and things of that sort, and that we need to, make sure that it is seen as illegal. I'm not here so much to spark that debate. I'll be fair with you guys, to be transparent right off the bat. I fit into the first camp. I've been a big believer in legalization for a while. I've gotten rid of a lot of the stigma and really learned about it over the past few years. And personally, I have both drank and smoked before, so I can tell you it's just about as safe, in my opinion at least. But again, everyone will have different opinions on it. That being realized, I want to spend some time to go ahead throughout the video and talk more on the central point that I really want to discuss, and that is the market, the emerging market of cannabis. I've been following this trend for a very long time, back since 2011, 2012. This is really when I started to get engaged in not only politics, but really started to see the potential behind this sector, but also what was holding it back. So we're going to be talking about all those different topics today. So I've kind of rambled on in the intro here, I think, just to kind of give a good precursor about what we're going to be discussing. We're going to be focusing on the market and the potential behind it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about the cannabis market right now. So over the past, like I said, almost past decade, we have seen a major change in the cannabis market. We've not only seen Canada recently legalizing recreational marijuana as well as medicinal marijuana on a broad scale across the country, which has made a huge boost to the market, but we can obviously see that equities as well have followed. Now, this is the Global Cannabis Stock Index, which comes from New Cannabis Ventures. It's one of the few actual nice indexes out there really available on the cannabis market. There aren't too many, and it's good to see that there are some companies coming together and kind of compiling this data. But it's a mixture of a variety of stocks, most of which are in Canada, or some of the few U.S. plays like GW Pharmaceuticals, which is actually a pharmaceutical cannabis play, and Kronos Group, which was recently got Altria, I think, got a huge stake, or one of the large tobacco companies got a stake in. Anyways, it's been the buzz of the town over the past few years, and we can see that from the highs back here about a year ago, actually, from when we're recording, we've seen that there's been a pretty big decline, and it's brought us back to really before the major period of euphoria, back in the period of what we saw back in 2017. Now, talking about this price action here, I want to spend some time to say that right now I'm not too eager to invest in cannabis stocks. It's not that I don't see the sector growing. If you're a long-term investor, I think this is at a range where you can start to maybe get comfortable, but again, I'm not going to recommend you guys buy anything. You guys have to determine that for yourself. But as we can see here, we are getting a nice pullback in prices, and I like to buy dips. But we're still just 1 year away from the peak, and I believe that this market is going to have another few months to maybe even a full year of continued pullback in price. But we'll be talking later on about some of the changing factors and things to look forward to going into the next year that will shift not only public policy, but also will shift major moves within markets and really start to shift a lot of market value from other sectors into the cannabis sector. Now, as we can see across the board, public support for recreational marijuana legalization has been growing rapidly over the past few years. There is little to no political topics that have seen this kind of shift. You can look across the board. Most things usually stay consistent and maybe slightly vary over time, but legalization of marijuana has seen rapid support, not only from millennials, in this case, for example, people who are more towards my age group, even Gen Z. They don't even have Gen Z on this chart, but Gen Z is like really off the chart in this case. You can see Gen X, boomers, and even the silent generation reaching towards 40%. So with this kind of rapid leap of support in just around 2 to 3 decades, What's changing here right now? Well, we obviously can see that there's been a big public support across the idea, again, of that more libertarian principle of, my body, my choice in this case. But I want to spend some time to say that I don't believe even public support is really what's going to drive legalization. I know that sounds kind of cynical, and I'll talk about why I remain cynical on this and actually back it up with some data. But it has to do with how public policies actually get passed, right? So we'll spend some time to talk about this real quick without rambling on too long. But there's a really great video that I found years back, and it just speaks to a real honest truth. There was a study done at Princeton that talked about the support for a public policy and the likelihood of it getting passed. Now, in this chart right here, it puts it very clearly. You would think the ideal representation would be that if 0% of people support something, there'd be a 0% chance of passing it. And that if there was 100% support, there'd be a 100% chance of passing in this case. Now, of course, we're not always going to get the ideal representation. It's just ideal. But you would think we'd have something similar to what our ideal representation would be. Well, that's not the case. In fact, there is a 30% likelihood practically on any position, no matter if there's 0 support for it or 100% support for it. And if you go throughout the video, they actually show what happens when you actually take elite representation. And this is really what's known as special donors, special interests, things of the sort, lobbyists in this case. When you start to see money enter into politics, things start to move a little bit more in your favor. If no money supports it, there's very likely a chance that it's never going to get passed. If there is a major amount of money behind it, it is very likely to pass. 2/3. It has a 60% chance in this case, almost 2/3 of a chance of getting passed. So you can see a very different representation from public opinion. It's a very sad reality, but it's the truth, guys. It's something we have to admire in some case when we're talking about this topic. If we want to see cannabis legalized, or if we're anticipating it as an investment, it's a matter of the money flowing. Where is the money going? Where is the most opportunity lying? Because where the most opportunity lies, the more money there's going to be for lobbying to make it get passed or to keep it illegal. So this is something that I like to coin. It was a term I came up with a while ago, and we'll talk about it in just a moment. Again, this is the study, if you guys would like to check it out personally. But this is something that I like to coin the pendulum of incentives, right? So pendulum swings back and forth. And pendulums can start at a certain position, but they can switch over time, and they can also go back to the same position over time as they'll sway back and forth. But this pendulum analogy that I use for incentives is the shift of opinions that are going to really sway over public policy, and it has to do with where the money is, right? Money drives the world. It's not some kind of conspiracy. It's a pretty simple analogy on how the world works. Wherever the opportunity is, the public policy will meet to it. So let's go ahead and spend some time. Why is the pendulum of incentives important to focus on? What's really changed over the past decade, for example? It may seem like a long time, but it's really not that long in the sense even of American history and the global history of civilization. Let's see what's really changed over the past years. Well, we have two different sides here. We have the pros for legalization and the pros of prohibition. So under the pros of legalization, there were two potential pros that were coming up over the past few years. With a lot of years of prohibition on drugs, for example, class 1 scheduling of marijuana, there was little research starting to pop up talking about how there was medicinal benefits and potential tax revenue ramifications. If we can bring it into a legal market, hey, people are going to consume it anyways, why don't we just simply tax it? And along with that, guarantee safety regulations, things of that sort. So again, medicinal benefits in the sense that it could help people, for example, with pain relief, with epilepsy. This has been one of the clearest examples of cannabis far back into the early 2000s, where cannabis could be used to cure epilepsy, cure things, for example, like stress and anxiety, or at least help reduce the symptoms of these different types of medical issues in this case. So we had a little bit of things going at the time that incentivized maybe legislation to move and maybe opportunity for businesses in this case, and for states to start racking in more tax revenue. But it was going up against a major set of different sectors and businesses that have major financial interests. So you don't need me to tell you this, guys. The opioid business is massive in the United States. There are massive families and people who have strong levels of investments in the opioid business, and not to mention the broader pharmaceutical sector. And when you start to expand into the pharmaceutical drugs that might be able to be replaced by cannabis, I mean, you're getting into the tens of billions in this case. So that mixed with the opioid business, which is really focused on pain relief, that's the vast majority use case, or I'd say the vast majority of use cases for opioids tend to be from pain, right? When you start to see these, you're starting to see that there's billions of dollars of business behind it. Private prisons, for example, right now estimated to be a $5 billion business. Cartels and illegal drug trade, $46.4 billion, right? This is just simply cannabis moving across the border. This isn't including cocaine. This isn't including heroin. This is solely cannabis. And along with that as well, the DEA. The DEA is a business. It keeps people employed. All to the law enforcement. I'm a big supporter of law enforcement personally, but at the same time, there has been corrupt activities in the DEA, and they do fight for continued continued increases in the budget to make sure that they continue to stay employed. Right? If there isn't a drug issue, there's no DEA. So again, you can see that there's a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate of different sectors that have lobbying interests within the government. You can go check, if you don't believe me, go look at how much the pharmaceutical and opioid business spend on lobbying in Washington. See how much your congressmen and women are taking from these companies, right? So anyways, I don't want to get too opinionated on it, but that's the reality of the case, guys. Again, it's following the money. Well, over the past few years, and really over the past decade, in 2019, the situation has changed dramatically. If we take a look here, we have not only seen that there are very clear real medicinal benefits, opening up a market, for example, for medical marijuana across the United States to replace a variety of opioids and other painkiller drugs and all types of different medical use cases as well. But we also see that there's real tax revenue incentives. When Colorado legalized marijuana, it sent shockwaves across many states because not only was it a very bold move for Colorado to make, seeing as it was the first state to do it in the United States, but the immense tax revenue that came in from it shocked so many different neighboring states, and they really didn't know what to do. They were worried about, for example, blocking off marijuana that might be exporting out of Colorado at the border, but along with that as well, they were very worried, thinking, maybe there might be an opportunity here for tax revenue. But these were still all too minuscule. The real craze came in when two things became clear: that there was a growing opioid crisis in the United States, and with that, there is going to be need. This is something where public opinion is going to come in, and necessary regulation is going to come in on the opioid sector, which has been hitting a lot of the opioid companies. I'm fine with that personally, but along with that, there has been statistics and data that has made it very clear as to what this market can be in the long term, how big legalizing cannabis can be for not only the United States, but for global markets. And estimates are estimating that by 2025, this market is supposed to be near $150 billion in annual revenue. That is big enough to shift all of this away. When you see the opioid business facing stark criticism, when you see the pharmaceutical system facing stark criticism. A few years ago, for example, private prisons, you can even take a look at their public stocks. They've been pretty much pushing sideways for the past few years, ever since the DOJ was close to stating that they will not be building any more public prisons. The cartel and illegal drug trade, right now, continuing to operate business, getting hit heavily. This number is getting hit heavily by the states that are starting to legalize it, and the DEA as well is not as much needed in this case when you start to see cannabis being sold legally in a variety of states in the United States. So you're starting to strip dry the business opportunity from the pros of prohibition, and you're starting to suck it in to the pros of legalization. The pendulum has already started, right? It's already swung. It's not there past 50% just yet, but it's getting really, really close. And when it passes 50%, it's going to move quickly, all right? So that's the important thing to take into mind. For the past decade, the playing field has changed. And I want to back it up by a few different things. I don't want to go through way too many data points to bore you guys to death. But the Sackler family, for example, huge invested interest in opioids. They're behind Purdue and a lot of the major pharmaceutical companies that have been selling opioids over the past few years, prescription opioids. And in this case, there's been massive criminal investigations, massive allegations against these companies, and they've started to face major fines, lawsuits, things of that sort. And not to mention, they have to worry eventually about potential regulation. And we'll talk a little bit more about the pharmaceutical sector in a bit. But one thing that's important to take into mind is that Another thing is, as we talked about, many states are already starting to build vacuums in the United States where this is legalized. We have now a variety of states from the full west coast of California to Washington, Nevada, and Oregon. We also have Colorado, we have Michigan, and even a little bit of a push in the northeast of the United States from states like Maine and Vermont and Massachusetts. And outside of that, we have states like New York and New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Rhode Island that are medicinally legalized. You can see how there's almost a push from these more probably liberal thinking areas. It makes sense. California, Northeast usually tend to be a little more Democrat or more liberal on social issues, starting to compress within the United States a growth and a change in public opinion. And it's very fascinating to see, like over the past decade, this map was nowhere near this kind of dark green that we're seeing here. It was very, very light green. In this case, there was no legalization. There was no medicinal legalization. There was no decriminalization. It was very, very small in that case back in 2009. But the playing field is changing. And as this happens, the illegal market starts to see less demand. You start to see less demand in the pharmaceutical sectors. People start to opt in. I can tell you guys personally, I have family in Oklahoma, for example. It's my stepdad's mother, so my step-grandma in a sense, who was on prescription opioids for years. And she now pairs it in with CBD oil, which is an extract. It's cannabidiol, which is the extract that doesn't get you high or anything. It just simply helps provide pain relief. And I'll tell you, she prefers that way more. But it's very hard for her to wean off the opioids in this case. A topic for another time. But again, important to see how these shifts are going to start pushing the pendulum in that case. And as I mentioned before, people will start to move away from pharmaceutical drugs if they have this option, especially if it's as easy as going in and picking it up recreationally. But I can tell you on most medicinal states, if you want to get cannabis, you'll be able to get it. This has been the case in California, for example. When it is able for a doctor to prescribe it, there will be people who easily overprescribe things like cannabis with little to no oversight, which can be a problem in that case. I think there needs to be more strict regulation in that case for medicinal use in that case, especially if you're under 21. But anyways, again, you're starting to see that vacuum start to form in the United States. And if you guys don't believe all this, if it seems too much like it's a little too one-sided in regards to this kind of shift happening, take a look at IBB. All right, this is the iShares NASDAQ Biotech Index Fund. This is a major fund that a lot of people hold that pretty much is a good weighted index on the sector of pharmaceutical drugs. Take a look at the chart here. Whereas U.S. equities, as we talk about a lot on the channel, have been going up to new highs going into 2017 and 2018, pharmaceutical drugs haven't made a new high since back in 2015, the summer of 2015. It's been over 3 years since we've seen highs in this market. And if this doesn't signal that the sector is hanging by a thread, I don't know what will. When you barely see price holding above the 50-month moving average and even dipping last month in December below that level, this signals that the pharmaceutical sector is worried because there's something coming that is going to strip a lot of demand from this sector. People are tired of the ridiculous prices. They're tired of the patents that are keeping these prices so high. They're tired of really what I call the pharmaceutical pipeline. It's something I learned about from, I kind of label terms to kind of get a more better visual representation. But I've gotten to talk to a lot of people in the pharmaceutical sector. And it's not even just the drug companies that keep costs so high. It's a monopolized pipeline of 6 major corporations that make things so expensive. And I'll talk about that in a future video if you guys would like. But again, as a macro trader, I get fascinated by this stuff, and you can start to see the signs of weakness. So, again, I guess I've talked a decent amount here in regards to that shifting pendulum. But again, don't forget that when there is enough incentive monetarily, people will make the switch. When there are enough people coming together, putting their efforts and their money and time together to outweigh this other business, when there's more opportunity, you will start to see the shift. When you start to see the lobbying dollars, when you start to see organizations building up and pushing for it, it will happen. So that's the major thing I wanted to push across, guys, to kind of share. As you all can probably see, I do have a little bit of opinion on it, but at the same time, I'm more looking at this in a market perspective. This is how I approach a lot of things as a macro trader. You have to look at so many factors. In fact, I'll tell you, cannabis was the sector that actually really got me thinking the way I did, in the sense as to how I could start to spot how there were connections that were keeping this sector down, right? there's always going to be interest at every corner for pretty much any political policy. Who is aiming to benefit, right? And it's just a matter of following the money. So anyways, that's it pretty much for today, guys. I'll talk more about this later down the road. I'll do some updates from time to time. If you guys like the video, please leave a thumbs up down below. I really appreciate it. Again, if you guys stayed this long to hear me ramble, hopefully I had something valuable to say. But again, it's a sector that I've been keeping up with for a long time. I remember when I was actually young, I wrote like 40 or 50 pages of a book talking about legalization of cannabis, and maybe I'll finish it one day and re-update it. But again, used to be very fascinated with the topic. Love to hear what you guys think down below. And I'll even tell you, like I mentioned earlier, I don't really like doing it personally, but I think it should be your choice. And either way, there is going to be a killer market of opportunity here over the next 5 to 10 years. So don't bat an eye. Don't turn away from it. Don't take it with a grain of salt. It definitely looks like an interesting market to keep an eye on. And as I mentioned, we'll keep an eye on it here on the Data Dash channel. So stick around, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Stay tuned.